Good morning, Terry.
Good morning.
Thanks for doing this.
You're welcome.
I know it can be one of the challenging factors for me is finding people that are willing to share and talk about their life. And so thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you. Every conversation is always interesting because I don't always know where it's going to go. But from the few things I've learned about you already, I'm excited about it. And, one passion that we do share is basketball. And I have 4 kids and 3 boys that really enjoy basketball. I showed you a video, and so excited to get into that. But the way it works is the flow is generally just a chronological order of your life. And then as we get into certain parts of your life, we'll probably talk about whatever that career was or different philosophies or ideas that you've picked up along the way. And then if there's any other information you'd like to share, I'm happy to do that. So let's start at the beginning. When you start, where you grew up, and what I guess age 2 to 6 or 2 to 10 was like.
Okay, be glad to. I was born in Walla Walla, so I've been an Eastern Washington guy almost my entire life. And then when I was 6 months old, I had a twin brother. My folks moved to the farm in Whitman County, just north of Walla Walla, about 60 miles. So I grew up on a farm, kind of a lonely existence.
What did they farm?
Wheat, cattle, and alfalfa hay. A lot of work.
Does that farm still exist today?
Yes, it does. It's still owned by the family.
Oh, nice.
And so my brother and I, we just had each other out on the farm, and we became very competitive in sports at a very young age. And we'd play basketball. Sometimes we'd go to 100 baskets a night, one-on-one.
Yeah.
So we became very competitive that way, for good or bad,
right,
in the rest of our lives.
Yeah, I mean, that's similar to my boys. They're not quite twins, but they always have each other. We joke now because it's like they spend 99.99% of their life together. There was a period of time where they showered together when they were younger. And then one day the older son was like, "Can I shower by myself now?"
Sure.
We're like, "All right, that's fine." But
sure.
yeah, so would you say your relationship with your brother, did it ever get to the point where it was detrimental? Or were you able to keep friends with him at a young age, and you had
we
respect?
Kept our friendship forever. We were very close, and we went to a small high school, Lacrosse High School, 100 students in the high school. And basketball was really emphasized. Nothing to do in the wintertime for all the farmers.
Right.
So it's kind of like the Hoosier movie atmosphere. And so our goal was to go to state, and at least by our senior year, and we made it, barely, but we did.
So who was better?
I was always a little better offensively, but our real strength was defense for both of us. We were quick, and we could stop people.
Nice. One thing that I find with my boys, it's hard for the younger one to receive feedback. So we talk about you have to be coachable. And I don't know if you struggle with that, or if your brother struggled with that, but it's hard for him to receive positive feedback from people to be like, "Hey, that's good, but you can always improve in this area."
Well, that's a great question, because what really happened was one of us would develop a different move, and we learned to go both left-handed and right-handed at a very young age. So once I developed a left-handed hook shot, I could beat him. But it would only take about 2 nights, and then he'd be able to defend it.
Yeah.
And he would develop something I'd have trouble stopping.
Yeah.
So we learned from each other.
Nice.
As we grew older.
Yeah. I mean, I had older siblings, so I grew up like an only child, so I didn't get that experience of having a sibling to push me and to be better. Or I tell my boys, like, you have it really good. The fact that you literally have a playmate,
yes,
24/7 that you can play with and interact with and hopefully challenge and get better.
Right.
But as a parent, we have to make sure that relationship stays positive, right? Are they going to get along every minute of the day? No. But can they generally like each other?
Yeah, so anyway, we thought that we would like to try to play college basketball. Our dream was always to play Division I basketball, but we went to Whitworth College our freshman year in Spokane, and we played, but we learned that there was a lot of people out there a lot better than us.
Was that a harsh reality?
Oh, yes, but we were pretty practical about it. And there were other circumstances. That was in 1966 and 67, and the Vietnam War was raging. So we transferred to WSU to get the education we wanted, but also to go to ROTC. So we went into the military in 69 as officers,
So you
and
both
we
did.
were able to determine a little bit more what our direction would be in the military.
Mm.
So we both finished. He went to Vietnam and I went to Korea. They split us up, but we both got home okay. And
Hmm.
we're glad we did it, but we wanted to develop our own careers after that.
Was it like for my sons? All they know is each other. When you guys did end up splitting, was that hard or was that just a natural progression of life where it's like, because you think you probably spent 21 years together?
Good question. I remember the day we split because he was going to Vietnam and I was going to Korea. So we knew that we were going to be divided for probably a year.
Hmm.
And we kept in touch
Right.
with each other somewhat in those days, but it all worked out. And then he developed his career. I developed mine. We both got married and went our different direction, but we stayed in touch and we stayed geographically fairly close to each other in eastern Washington. And he took over the family farm
Mm.
eventually. And I went to law school at Gonzaga Law School and became a lawyer and was a lawyer in a small town of Dayton near Walla Walla. It was a great career, great place to raise our two kids, and it was a successful career, and we were able to do lots of things besides just practice law.
Nice. So let's rewind a little bit. One thing I always like to talk about childhood, as far as what did kids do back then? Was it for you? Was it just pretty much basketball when you were
No, we
farming?
played all the sports. Our dad was a taskmaster, and the farm needed a lot of work to get it developed, and he worked us awfully hard as kids. I mean, we'd have to get up at 5 or 6 in the morning and do chores, sometimes very cold weather, and we'd have to come home after school, milk the cows. This sounds like some story out of 100 years ago, but it wasn't that long ago.
Right.
And so we learned that work ethic very early.
Yeah.
The other thing that really, I think, had an impact was our school. Small school, we had 25 in our class. For the school to function, we had to participate. So we were in every sport, football, basketball, baseball, track, and we were in chorus and band and drama. And so that carried forward into my career and how I lived my life and lived so that we would contribute to our community also in many ways.
Yeah, I think about, obviously I have young children, but I think about just children in general today, and we're missing that component of actual work, right? Kids
Yeah.
doing stuff other than watching their iPad all day.
Yes.
And there's so many studies out now that show how detrimental that is.
Yes.
And like we'll be at a church on Sunday and all the young kids have their little iPad. It's funny because the guy was literally preaching on don't give your kid the phone all day. As you can see all the parents like trying to take their electronics away, but it's such a different world today. And then we wonder, why do kids have all these issues? And it's like, oh, they have this diagnosis or this diagnosis. And it's like, how about they just go out there and work?
Yes.
And that's one thing I think we're missing.
I agree.
So when a pivotal moment in people's lives is when they go from high school and they're leaving the family. At that point in life, did you know what you wanted to do? Or was it because the Vietnam War, so that kind of like, that's just a pivotal moment. I'm always curious, like, what was your mindset like at 18? Was it, I want to get out of here, I want to be a lawyer? Or is it like, I don't know, but I'm just going to take the next step?
Another good question. I really wanted to get off the farm. It was hard work, and I'm more of a people person. And so I did not have in mind at that time, like most 18-year-olds, what I wanted to do. But way in the back of my mind, I thought about the law because I would watch Perry Mason on black and white TV when I was a kid. And gosh, he was good. He won every case. I thought that'd be cool to do something like that. So I really didn't get serious about it until after I graduated from WSU, and I graduated with a business degree that went into the military as a military policeman.
So MP.
And so the first 9 weeks of officer basic was in Georgia, and there was a lot of these cool young captains that were just out of law school that taught a lot of search and seizure and all the laws that military police needed to know, and that impressed me. Plus, I ran into a couple of Harvard Law School people that were in law school at the time that were actually in my own squad in company. So I got to know them real well, and they were influential. I thought, I think I'll give this a try when I get out of the military.
Or JAG's Navy, were you interested in, does the Army have their own lawyers?
Oh, yes, the JAG Corps.
Okay. Is that Navy, or that's just military?
That's Army. Each branch has their own
JAG.
Their own equivalent of the JAG Corps.
Oh, okay.
And some people had a choice to go do that, but it's a 3 to 4 year commitment, and they wanted to get in and out as soon as they could, like the two Harvard people I was with. And so they chose military police that I hadn't thought of, but that's as close as you can get that's legally related, but not that extra length of term.
So how long were you in the military?
2 years.
2 years. So you did all the initial basic stuff, being an officer, and then went to Korea for 2 years?
Right. Well, my first home in the States, stateside duty was at Fort Meade, Maryland, between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. Great place. And I was married by that time, and so my wife and I had a good time visiting the Smithsonian Institutes and all the things to see back there.
So how old were you when you got married?
I was 22.
And how did you know she was the one?
We met in high school. So she was from even a very small town 15 miles away from La Crosse named Hooper. And I was on the farm, and we just dated on and off, and we ended up getting married after I graduated from WSU.
How long have you been married now?
54 years.
54 years. We're going to talk more about marriage later.
Okay.
But, that's a long time.
Yes.
It's a long time to, as I was talking to Karen, the one who had been divorced a few times, I asked her, I would think over time marriage should get easier because you know and understand each other better. And I generally haven't seen that be the case.
It's not, because they keep running into challenges.
And so it's like, because think about this, most things in life, the longer you do it, either the easier or the better you are at it. But marriage seems to be one of those that doesn't always work out that way. But I do want to talk more about that later. So you got married, and that's what most people did. They got married at a younger age back then. Do you feel like the military helped you grow up faster, become a man, or you're already kind of self-aware enough to or did it bring some maturity into you that like?
Well, I think it helped me, as it just gave me probably a unique experience, especially when you're basically thrown into leadership positions as a second lieutenant, and you have responsibilities over a company or, a platoon of young people, usually younger than you. And I was involved with helping man a stockade in Fort Meade, Maryland. And they called them shipments of prisoners come in weekly, most of them AWOLs. Just young kids that couldn't fit into the military at all, and they'd run away and run home.
Yeah.
So you learned how to deal with all those situations, plus a few very serious offenders.
What was the common reason they just didn't like the military?
Homesickness.
Yeah.
Jerked out of their environment. Either many of them were poor, like farm kids or inner city kids, and this is a whole new environment, and it was structured, and they were forced to be disciplined, which we had a lot of discipline the way I grew up.
Yeah.
But
so
didn't.
Yeah, wasn't that foreign to you?
No, that's
a question I like to ask people is, when I look at the young generation today, let's say young adult, 18 to 22, compared to when you were 18 to 22, are people behaving like the normal behavior as 18 to 22, or are things worse than they are, or is it just like, no, every youth goes through this phase and they will work their way out of it? Because me in my mid 30s, I look at these young guys and I'm like, they are ill prepared for the real world. But is that what every generation always thinks of every generation? I don't know.
I think it is.
I haven't been through enough cycles to be like, was that what you were like? And then as you got into your 30s, you look at the younger guys and they're like, man, they're ill prepared. And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Oh, I think it's very historic that every generation, as they get older, become more critical of the younger generation coming up. And I wish I'd have memorized this quote, but there was a question that I read the other day. Who made this statement about how the next generation is going to fail because they're ill prepared? And what era was that? And it was interesting. It was Plato,
Really?
pre-BC.
Yeah.
So that's how long we've been critical of the next generations coming up.
Yeah.
I think it will work out. There's enough great young people out there, enough leaders coming along. They're certainly going to be challenged, but I think they're going to be able to work it out.
Yeah. And the one thing that we have today that they haven't had in the past 10,000 years is the access to information, but the access to so many people. And I'm learning more about just the effects of social media and how that can be so damaging, not just to guys, but even more so to girls. And partly is before, when you lived in a small community, you just had to worry about the 50 people in that community. But now you have access to 50 million, a billion. And our bodies just aren't designed to like really function in that way, which is why they're seeing such an increase in depression, why they're seeing all these increases of negative behavior and emotions, that it's like, I don't know if other generations had to face that same reality that this generation does. So it's really, really hard. So I don't know. It's just
I agree.
stuff I think about with my own kids. And then I see the next generation of adults coming up. They're not dating. They're not getting married. They're not even having conversations with the opposite gender. And is this novel, or is it just common for every generation? I think there's a little bit of both, but
I agree. I think you've said it well. I've read those statistics too, and it doesn't look good for the next generation. But the human being is very flexible, and they can find a way to work their way through it. And I think that's going to happen.
and I have to remind myself that, because sometimes you get caught in the doom and gloom, but it's like, we are pretty resilient.
Yes.
We've made it through wars, massive wars, world wars, Vietnam, and it's like we find a way. We just have to hope there's enough of the good guys who step up and make a change in their little world, and versus just not doing anything about it.
True.
So you got out of the military. You were already married at that time, and you decided to go back into law.
I went to law school the year after I got out of the military. So it took 3 years to complete Gonzaga Law School in Spokane. And I had a fraternity brother who was a farmer near Dayton, and he knew his lawyer was about to retire. So he introduced us, and we became a good fit, and we took over.
What
He
kind
was
of law?
a sole practitioner, general practice law. And I'll never forget the night that my partner at the time left and turned it over to me. It was a cold winter night in January, but I was faced with a huge challenge. Had a very busy law practice. I had recently been elected prosecuting attorney. We owned a title company, and I had also been appointed a United States bankruptcy trustee. So I had all those jobs, and it was tough. I had 4 secretaries that I kept very busy. But after a year, I went home, and I think I was almost in tears. And I told my wife, I just can't keep up with this.
Yeah.
And so
Because how many hours do you think you're putting in? 60, 80?
50, 60 hours a week.
Yeah.
So I'd always make sure I got home to have dinner with the family, though.
You had that priority.
High priority. And then if I needed more work, I would go back later that evening to work. But in any event, we put a little card up at Gonzaga Law School, need a lawyer. And I had some inquiries, and I ended up hiring a young guy that just had graduated, and he joined me, and that was a real positive, and we were good partners for over 30 years.
Wow. So for someone that has very limited knowledge on just being a lawyer, only thing I know is a TV show I used to watch called Suits, and it was more about the suit than being a lawyer.
Sure.
But like you said, it's like they win every case, and you're like, oh, that's so amazing. But you realize there's a lot more mundaneness to than just winning cases. So I would like to dive more into that because part of this podcast is so that someone who is interested in a particular career can actually hear it from someone that did it, which is why I like to interview people who, like a cop or whatever. And so I would like to dive into that more. Did you hear what they recently did with the bar in Washington State?
Yes, they didn't have to take the exam anymore, you mean?
Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't like that. I mean, you've got to have a certain standard, and that is at least a standard. I mean, it's been criticized over the years of being too difficult and so
Well, that's
forth.
the point.
But anyway, back to the law practice, you can tell it was a very general practice. So I wouldn't.
So what does that mean?
That meant I wouldn't turn anybody away that walked in the door. I mean, if it was a divorce or if it was, a contract case or maybe even a tort or a negligence case and so forth. I'm not saying I took every case, but I would listen to them. And if I felt I could not help them, it had to be pretty complicated, I would refer them to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the issues that came in, we could handle and we dealt with. And it created a lot of loyalty in a small community, both ways.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to help represent them and do the best job I could to make their position better. And of course,
so what were some like some of those first few cases that you took on that were memorable?
Well, a lot of them were estates, probates that we tried to get closed. And back then, the IRS was involved in a lot of them because you had to pay an estate tax in those days. Now the exemption's so high that it doesn't bother most people. But then there was checks written for pretty big sums of money, especially if a farmer, owned his farm, owned his land, it's worth quite a bit of money. Didn't have to make a whole lot of money off of it, unfortunately, but he'd still have to pay the estate tax based on the value of the property. That was a pretty big piece of our law practice. The bankruptcy trustee job meant I represented the creditors, the unsecured creditors. So that got me involved in some awfully interesting cases, and I kept that job just for the uniqueness of it and the challenge of it.
So what was that? I would like to unpack that more, as far as what made it unique or
why I did it, you mean?
Yeah, what kind of, I guess.
Well, it would get me out of Dayton at least once a month for what they call a first meeting of creditors. So first of all, I'd read all their schedules. They have to disclose everything they own and all their debts. And then I'd have a meeting with them that may last 5 minutes or much longer if they had assets. And so I met some very interesting people that way and very interesting assets all over, sometimes around the world.
Yeah.
Or in other states. And my job was to immediately assume responsibility for those assets. So I really had to rely on realtors and auctioneers because we had to immediately go in and secure the property and then try to get it sold.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like you're just a problem solver.
Yes.
And for you, I mean, it's crazy because you didn't have the internet back then.
No.
And so you really have to do your research, boots on the ground, due diligence, a lot of reading, a lot of connections you have to make. And in today's world, you don't even have to leave anywhere. But back then, I'm assuming you had to do a lot more.
A lot of phone calls, and you had to trust your people to help you. Because most of my cases came out of Walla Walla or Tri-Cities, that area. But once in a while, I'll just give you a quick example. I had somebody that owned a hotel, the Pismo Beach Hotel in Pismo Beach, California, a pretty substantial building. Wow. So I immediately called the sheriff down there and told him what had happened so they could secure it.
So the guy, why are you taking the asset? Because he's not paying a loan?
He filed bankruptcy.
Okay, he filed
That means
bankruptcy.
you give up the right to all of your assets.
Okay.
And I assume the responsibility as a trustee of all those assets. It may only be for
Because
a few
the
days.
bank's hiring you.
No, 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 no. I'm neutral. I mean, I get paid by the
Who
U.S.
hired you, him or the bank?
Nobody hires me.
Nobody hires you.
I'm a United States bankruptcy trustee. I'm appointed by the Department of Justice to
Oh,
do this. So I get a very small fee. I think it was $60 a case way back then.
so it's almost like nonprofit work.
No, but if you could turn it into assets, then I get a percentage of the sale.
So
So there's
yeah.
some incentive to
Okay.
look at the assets, and then that money would go to the unsecured creditors. That was really my job, to get some money back to the creditors. So anyway, there was a mortgage against that building. And it turned out that, as I recall, it wasn't worth as much as the mortgage. So I had to turn it back to the mortgage company.
Yeah.
But they couldn't get it until I turned it over to them, too. So I had to investigate it, make sure it wasn't valued
Yeah.
too low or too high.
Interesting. So you like that because it would throw you some more curveballs.
It was a
Just-
challenging job. But
Interesting. Because I did one with another lawyer, a podcast, and he talked about his initial experience and he hated it because he worked for some big law firm
yeah,
and he wasn't able to like creatively solve problems. It was just mindlessly reading all this paperwork so that some other person could make some decision.
most lawyers specialize.
Yeah.
There's advantages to that.
Right.
I did not. I enjoyed, like I just said, all the challenges of a general practice.
So back then, were you going to court? Were you ever having when most people think of lawyers, they generally think of going in front of a judge, pleading a case. Did you ever
I
do
went
that
to
type
court certainly a few times early on, but it was less and less the older I got and the more experience. I didn't like court that well. I'd rather solve problems, in an office and settle matters and so forth, which normally
isn't that
you
what
could
they
do.
say? Most things are settled. It's
Yes.
very rare things go to court.
Yes.
Is that because time and cost
Yes.
is usually beneficial for all parties involved to
Yes.
not have to get a judge involved?
And you have to compare the risk of losing with the risk of a settlement,
Right.
which is less dollars.
Right.
So that's up to the client to make that decision.
Yeah, I have a similar, not anywhere close to the extent, but like when I talk, so I'm a property manager, so when I talk to my owners about some situation we're in, it's always risk versus reward, right?
That's right.
You can go this route, but you're increasing the likelihood of this outcome. So sure, you have the ability to go that route, but if you just go this route, it's usually quicker, faster, and resolved sooner.
And I really have a high respect for the lawyers that can make that decision early in the game before you build up a whole bunch of attorney's fees.
Mm-hmm.
You try to look into the crystal ball and figure out the risk reward, as you say, and make an early decision if you can. It might be a little more money that you pay out than the client wants to do or to receive, whichever end you're on. But if you've got a good lawyer that can figure that out early in the game, that's very important. So,
And maybe you do have an answer right now, or maybe you have to think about it more, but I personally like to operate off, the term I use is framework. And for me, it's like, the more frameworks I can have, the less decisions I have to make, because I already know these are some people say principles or whatever. So there's different terms for it. I just like the word framework. So it's like, for example, my framework is I eat within a certain time frame, which helps me not overeat. It's not a law. It's not a rule. It's just, I know if I condense my time, people call it time restricted eating, it's just hard to overeat. And so that's a framework. And then within that framework is I try to prioritize protein. And so by doing certain things, I no longer have to think like, should I eat this? Should I eat that? It's like, no, here's the framework that I operate under. And if I do that, then I should hopefully not gain weight and, get the body that I want. So that's just an example. So I'm curious for you, when you were taking on these legal matters and over time, did you develop principles or frameworks that helped you make decisions faster? If so, I guess what was the secret sauce for you.
I don't think there is a secret to that because the cases are so different.
Correct.
I love your idea about food. That's exactly how I think. I eat 3 meals a day and I eat them regular time. And
Yeah.
I feel better if I eat regularly and sleep regularly and exercise regularly. So I try to do that. But yes, I apply that generally to my law practice. And I do try to look ahead as much as possible as to what the possible results could be. I try to analyze every case that way so that you have your options ahead of time. And I think it's important to explain those to your client ahead of time too, about here's where we could be heading. So start thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. I'm assuming with you, I mean, you're probably high IQ.
No,
Or would you say, I would say so. You think you're average? Like to be able to think through all that, I mean, that takes a lot of mental.
I suppose that's up to my background and my education, but
Yeah.
I had to really work hard to get through law school. I
Yeah.
had to study hard, and some of my classmates I really admire because they were brilliant. They could read it once and they knew it. I
Yeah.
had to read it more than once.
So that, I mean, that's encouraging to hear because it's like sometimes we think it's like in sports. Some people just have that natural skill level.
Yeah.
And I remember realizing this. I used to be really big into running, and I wanted to run a marathon. And for me to run a marathon would take me, if I wanted to run a decent marathon, I'd already had to be in decent shape, and then it'd take me 6 months to train, minimum.
Correct.
I met this guy in 2 weeks. He ran a marathon that qualified for him for Boston. And it's like, how's that fair? Like, I would have to work years to even get to the point where maybe I could qualify for Boston, right? And this dude, after 2 weeks of minimal training, qualifies for Boston. So we can see that in the physical world, and we'll get into basketball more. But and some people have that in just mental capability. So for you, you had to work hard to, you put in the work. It wasn't just handed to you, but you had to put in the mental capacity to think through all that. And because you're essentially just assimilating a lot of information, and then hopefully being able to present in such a way that makes sense to your client.
That's right. I mean, remember I said the work ethic, I think that played a role. I try to outwork everybody if I had to.
Yeah. What were some interesting or more memorable cases that you got over the years?
Geez.
Or ones where they didn't quite turn out the way you expected, where you're like, oh, okay.
Well, there was big important cases to the community, but then it's the unexpected ones that are the most interesting. I was a brand new lawyer in Dayton. I had this older fella come in who had just moved to Dayton. I didn't know him. He said, I got some problems with my brother and his family in San Diego. I said, okay. He said, I don't know what to do. Well, to make a long story short, I asked him for a reasonable retainer, and I flew down there to figure out what the problem was.
So he wouldn't even tell you what the problem was.
Oh, he didn't know. But he really, he put enough faith in me, I guess, to go figure it out. And so I flew down there, called the coroner's office, called a lawyer contact that I had. I found out that it was his older brother and wife, and she had dementia. And he found out that he was getting dementia and couldn't take care of her anymore. So he went out to the garage, put her in the car, put a hose in the muffler tailpipe, and shut the garage door and attempted, obviously, to kill himself and her.
Mm-hmm.
He left the window down a little bit, and she survived and he died.
Mm.
She had the dementia, so it backfired. Well, again, my mind went through all the scenarios of you could call it a crime. You got an estate. You got a person that came in as a house cleaner. And so I turned it over to the lawyer there, went to Mexico for a day, came back, went before the probate judge, and tried to figure all this out. And it turned out that there was an estranged daughter that they hadn't had any contact with. Their will left it to the housekeeper, but the daughter found out, so she came in and contested the will. It really got complicated. Quite a story. But I was gone. I was back home working by then. And eventually it got cleared up that the housekeeper got very little out of it because her lawyer failed her, committed malpractice. So she didn't get anything, but she sued him. I mean,
It
it was
gets real
just
messy.
sometimes you get into these complicated, messy cases.
Yeah.
But that I found that to be pretty fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are interesting cases.
Another one was just there's so many bankruptcy stories, but I had a couple of men who looked like they were from the Middle East came in and filed bankruptcy on a clothing store in the Tri-Cities, big clothing store. They owed $200,000 to a creditor, and they just filed bankruptcy, disappeared. So the U.S. trustee, kind of my boss in Spokane, came to visit, said, "Tell me all about that," because we found out that these two were Arabs, and they were trying to defeat the Israelites in the garment industry by declaring bankruptcy and taking their money on a national scale. I was just part of it on one case.
Yeah.
So that happened. Those types of interesting cases happen every week or every month, which kept my interest.
Yeah, you don't need to watch. I think the reason why a lot of people watch movies and TV shows because their personal life isn't that interesting.
Right.
And so when your life is that interesting, it's like, I don't need to go find entertainment elsewhere because my job is entertaining enough.
Yeah, and another case, and I could tell you more stories, but I won't. But one was a bankruptcy in Tri-Cities where two partners got angry with each other, and they had developed a software program, which I didn't know anything about, never heard of it. It had to do with dairy herd management. But I found out that it had sold several places across the United States. I don't know why they put it in bankruptcy, but when I showed up for that first meeting of creditors, 7 other lawyers showed up. I thought, wow, this case is worth a bunch of money. And it was, because it was very valuable.
Wow.
But who would know that?
Yeah.
And that got into litigation and lots of problems. But eventually we sold it and got the creditors paid some money.
I'm curious, why do so many people, what are some of the main reasons people go into bankruptcy? Obviously it's they don't have enough funds, but I think I'm curious based off of all the cases that you've seen, what has been your personal experience with if a business owner is listening, it's like, hey, this is things to look out for so you prevent that.
Several reasons. And I added up one time that over my career, I had about 23,000 cases.
Wow.
A lot of them was being naive, young couples getting married, for example, young people overextending themselves. That's the number one reason. Buy a car when they shouldn't have, or they couldn't afford it. Losing their job. I mean, a lot of it was for good reasons, that they couldn't help. But a lot of it, if they'd have been prepared and thought ahead, they would never have entered into this debt. So that's number one. But then there's just the economy, losing your job, hospital bills, doctor bills. When you have an accident or you get sick, you don't have enough insurance, that can force you into bankruptcy. So there's no single thing, but I would say the lack of knowledge, which takes me back to the lack of teaching in grade school and high school. There needs to be more education on how to deal with the economy and how to deal with your personal finances. I think that's a lack of education in that important area.
It's funny you mention that because it's like, so the average kid spends, if they don't go to college, they spend 12 years in a classroom, but they don't teach things that really matter. Your health, right? If you don't understand your health,
That's right.
you're going to get I said this the other day, but it's like, there's 3 Ds you can worry about. You choose which one you want to focus on. If you have a good diet, then you don't have to worry about disease and death. If you're not deliberate about your diet, then you will have disease and you'll most likely have premature death. So just pick whatever D you want to focus on, but I would recommend focusing on the good diet so that, yes, you will die at some point, but if you have poor health, diet and exercise, then those other two will become an issue. So you're going to focus on one of them. I would caution you to focus on the first one so you don't have to spend the rest of your life thinking about the other ones, right? I'm not trying to live forever, but I would like to be as disease free as long as possible, or not die at 50 versus 100.
Very true.
So health, and then like you said, most people don't know how money actually works, right?
That's right.
And it's more than just like, oh, people need to learn how to check their balance their check. And it's like, we don't do checks anymore, but just the basic concept and understanding of finances. And so my kids are homeschooled, and so I'm making sure, like, I don't need them to grow up super fast, right? But I do want them to be, hopefully by the time they're 18, have a well-rounded idea of concept of the real world, which has led me, and you asked, why do I do this? And one of the, as I've been doing these podcasts, it's led me to want to write a book someday. And I'm still brainstorming it, but it's basically to get to the point where when my kids are 18, I can give them this book and say, here's all the things that I've spent the past 22 years with so I'll be about 40 when my kid turns 18. So I spent 40 years writing this book so that when you're 18, you're not having to think through all the things that it took me 22 years to figure out, right? So give them to each of my kids, and then hopefully if it's done well enough, other parents can give to their kid and be like, here's issues that they should have taught you in school for the past 12 years but didn't. So here's a book that's going to help you at least. Not my goal, and we can talk about this more, how do you get people to think critically, right? My goal isn't to tell you what to do, but more of, can you think critically through these issues? And I think right now in school, they're too busy telling kids what to think versus how to think. And, so that's, in writing this book, I want to keep interacting with as many people as possible, because they will help shape my ideas, my viewpoints, but also help me write this book. So it's a compilation of, I've talked to all these people. It's not just my world experience. Maybe I'm interesting, but not interesting enough where I have enough vast knowledge to be able to impart on them. So that's something I'm working on, so that when they are of age, they can, this is just so many people struggle with basic stuff. And if you can help them wrestle through that lack of knowledge, then it's like, if you take the time to read this, hopefully you'll be better off than I was. But so I guess what makes someone a good lawyer? What does it mean to think like a lawyer, or how do they think?
Well, it helps to be basically smart, helps to know the law. I took a little different route getting there, because a lot of people take different subject matters like political science in college. I didn't. I took business, got a finance degree. That helped me immensely, because tax issues are very important in almost every business decision that's made. I think being very ethical comes across very quickly to people. That's very important, that you do what's right. And because clients are going to come in and they've messed up, or they made a mistake. They need to own up to their mistake. Now, what's the best way to get this resolved or work our way out of it without lying or cheating or doing something that you shouldn't do? So you're faced sometimes with pretty immense problems, and it can be personal, it can be financial, it can be whatever, and you try to guide them through it the best you can based on your experience, knowledge of the law, but also that practical experience that sometimes gets you further than just knowing the law. But a combination of those things, it's what makes a good lawyer.
Yeah, I just, in today's world, I think lawyers get such a bad rep, because we always think about lawsuits. And just like when I did the interview with the cop, he's like, yeah, because most times people's experience with the law is, or police officers getting a ticket.
Yeah.
And it's like, he's like, I never worked in that department. I actually went and solved crime. And so most people, I think, can get behind that, solving crime.
Sure.
And so how do we improve the disposition people have on lawyers, because it's just like, I don't know. I I would say the sentiment that people have on lawyers is generally not great.
I agree. It's negative. And you talk to most people that and they'll say they'll agree with you until they have a problem and they need a lawyer,
Right.
and they want the best lawyer.
Correct.
And usually they're happy, not every instance, with what that good lawyer did for them, and they're forever grateful.
Yeah.
Most of the lawyers I've worked with, by far, 90+%, are highly ethical, smart, eloquent, trying to do the right thing.
Yeah. And I think it's just
part of that is not trying to run up your fees. There's some lawyers that just take on a case and they just stir up the case so they can have more time in it. That's just as bad. I think that's unethical also. I try to get to a case and I want to get rid of the case. I mean, you want to do a good job, but I'm too busy. I have too many other cases to get to. Let's do the best we can to resolve this case and not let it drag on.
so like in your prime, at what point did you how many cases would you have on at a time?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, that's
Because there's so many times when things are so that's why you had all these people under you to help
Sure.
track the time and all that stuff.
sure the case can be defined differently. I mean, I might have 100 bankruptcies going at one time. That was pretty common, let alone my private practice with estates and contracts and so forth. So,
A lot.
yeah, a lot.
So on the personal side, as men, we generally, if we believe in working hard, we will work a lot. How did you offset not overworking, or maybe you did, I don't know. And how did you make time? Because I interact with men now that are 20s and 30s, and for the people I'm not going to even talk. We're not going to address people who are just lazy, but people who are hard workers. I think sometimes we err on overworking, or I don't know if the term's overworking, but just we work so much that we sacrifice everything else. And I'm curious how you handle that because you probably could work 80 hours a week if you so chose to.
That's a good question. And I balanced it. Balance was very important to me. Like I said, I wanted to be home with my kids every night, period. And I would delegate. I learned to delegate with my partner and later on a third lawyer associate, and certainly my secretarial staff.
Were they paralegals? Is that something different?
Oh, we didn't call them paralegals, but essentially they were. But I mean, like the basketball, I took on basketball coaching, and I learned that took a big chunk of time every afternoon or evening when we'd have practice or games. I coached for high school basketball for about 12 years. So that was incorporated also into this busy practice. So again, I would come back in the evening.
Would you say basketball is your hobby, or did you have other?
Could be. But I have been, whether you call it blessed or not, with a high energy level too. And so I could do a lot from early morning all the way through into the evening and get a lot accomplished. That was my goal.
Yeah, so you're very efficient with your time.
Yes, I guess that would be a good way to say it.
Yeah, when I talk to men now and I'm like, okay, you have work, you got to do that, you got to pay the bills, I get that. But outside of that, what do you have? And I'm finding some men don't have anything. And I would, again, you don't do whatever you want, but it's like, I would caution them to have some other things in their life other than work. Because let's say if you're having a rough day, your wife's mad at you, and work sucked, then it's like, well, yeah, your day's gonna suck. But if you have other things in your life, like I met you at the gym, and it's like, there's other things in my life where even if work isn't the best that day, or my wife, whatever, is mad, I still at least have the gym, or I have some kind of hobby, not to escape, but just if you have so many L's in your life, then your whole life can be pretty depressing. But if you have a few L's and a few wins, then they kind of balance out. And hopefully not every day's terrible, but I'm a huge proponent of you should have hobbies. You should have things outside of what you do that defines you so that you don't become defined by your work.
Yeah, and I would exercise. I'd play basketball. I mean, here I am, 77 years old, but I played basketball all my life, ever since 2 or 3 years old. And
Yes.
so that helped extend my energy level. The good exercise.
So, so when we had met, you'd mentioned that you went and played in in a tournament. What was that all about?
Well, I mean, again, I've played my whole life. My brother was really instrumental in learning about the Masters basketball leagues or senior basketball, and so he learned. I think we were 60 about the tournament in Utah, St. George, Utah. And actually, once we got there, it was for all sports. So it has roughly 11,000 participants in all sports, including basketball. And so he recruited some guys in Spokane area, and I recruited some guys in the Tri-City area that I knew. And fortunately, they finally agreed,
Yeah.
although they were reluctant at first. And we went down there, we won the gold medal the first time. And so, and that was full court, good competition basketball. We'd always dreamed about playing Division I basketball. I said earlier, we were now, because we played against several Division I players and a few former NBA players, all retired now.
Yeah.
But we could compete because we were in good physical shape and we could run the court better than they could.
So outside of basketball in your 30s, 40s, and 50s, did you have any other type of training program that you followed, working out, running, or was basketball your primary source of exercise?
Basketball was, but both my wife and I like to swim. We try to swim when we could. I golf. And we were just active too outside.
Did you ever get
physical?
Was there ever a phase in your life where you did gain weight, or did you stay slim?
Stayed pretty well slim most of the time. I could get 10 pounds overweight, but that would be the max. And I've had to lose a little to get ready for Hoop Fest coming up the end of this month in June in Spokane, the largest 3-on-3 tournament in the world.
How do you? A lot of guys. So obviously you know who Steve Kerr is.
Yes.
And he was talking about one of the dangers of AAU basketball is the excessive amount of training that is put on kids at such a young age. And then they don't value games and teamwork as much because it's all about the tournament. So who cares if you miss a game? And so he's saying these kids, once they get to the NBA, they have minimal, not very good teammates, but then injuries are so high because they've just put so much wear and tear on their body. By the time they hit the NBA, their mileage is so crazy that you're seeing these first and second and third draft players just getting injured in their first or second, even third season, you know, the Ball brothers and so it was very interesting because I think about it with my boys, it's like, there's the mindset of put in the work and train, but also not so much to the point where it becomes detrimental. So I think it's amazing that you're at this age and you're still able to compete like that, because most guys at 77, they're injured, they're hurt.
True. We found that big guys are very susceptible to that. That's why there's not so many big guys playing, although I've certainly have played with some of them, but they don't move very well as a norm.
So that's impressive that you're still able to go out there and function at a pretty high level at this age. So I'm curious what a lot of people say genetics, but you're doing something, and I would gander to say you're not overtraining, and you didn't.
No, I don't overtrain. I have to tell you that.
And you didn't throughout your whole life, so that at this point in time, you're still able to function.
I guess so. I hadn't really thought about it.
Yeah, I did a podcast with a guy that had done over 100 triathlons. So he's 75 now, and he's like, people in that world, they love training.
Yes.
Right? They don't even care about the actual event. They just love putting in the miles. And he's like, if you live like that for 30 years, you're done, and they're not able to do it anymore.
Well, I don't like to run that much, but I've only got 3 weeks left for the tournament. So I'm out running every other day just so I can get in sufficient shape to play well in the tournament. But I would not be running normally. That's uncomfortable. Basketball, you run a lot, but you don't even think about it because your mind is on scoring or stopping your man or whatever.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've kept your training seasonal. And then when you're not in season, what is your kind of fitness program?
Well, swimming is probably the main thing because that just helps tone the whole body. That's just good. And I think the other important thing that I've done for some time is I stretch in the morning as soon as I get up. I'll never forget one of Kobe Bryant's interviews. They asked him, what 3 things would you do different in your life? He said, stretch, stretch, and stretch. So I take about 15 minutes and I stretch arms, shoulders, legs especially. Try to get all the parts of my body that I know is going to be challenged.
Nice. So, when you, because you'd mentioned that you became a politician.
Yes.
Let's get into that. But I'm curious, is every judge at some point, were they a lawyer at some point?
Normally, yes. Yes.
Was that ever an idea for you to become a judge?
I've been asked that before, and the answer is no. I was never interested in it. And I think the reason is maybe I'm too much of a people person, but you've really got to know the law, and you've got to go study those cases that come in and the briefs from the lawyers and figure all that out. And I just wasn't interested in doing that. I'd rather go out and deal with people. And so I decided not to run for judge. But my dad was really the influence. He ran way back in the late 80s for the state legislature and was in the state legislature, I think, for 10 years from Whitman County, Republican country.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, maybe I'd like to try that someday. I could make a difference out there. And but I'm going to wait till my kids are grown and gone, and maybe toward the end of my legal career. And so I decided to do it. I decided to run.
So how was that experience?
Very
Let's talk
tough.
about the initial, and then we'll go.
Yeah, very difficult at the beginning. I had some people talk me into it when I expressed some interest, but we had a very established.
So this is House of Representatives?
House of Representatives, very established Democrat farmer from the Walla Walla area. And he'd been there 22 years. And so I had an uphill battle. And it's a lot of work. You got a doorbell, and you got to form your committees and influence a whole lot of people to go to work for you and obtain contributions, etc., and campaign.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it helped that you were kind of known in that area because you were a lawyer?
Yes, it helped. And basketball, all the coaching and all those things. I was known, but it wasn't
the population of that county.
It's not a county, it's a district.
Okay.
And then the district was pretty large. It was Walla Walla and much of the Tri-City area, Pasco especially. So I knew I had to prevail in Pasco, and I wasn't that well known in Pasco. To make a long story short, I lost.
Ooh.
Only by a couple percentage points.
How was that feeling?
Well, it was not unexpected. But what happened that was unusual is he died within about 3 months of that campaign. He had cancer. He knew it. I was kind of suspicious of it, but
so the guy ran knowing he was going to die.
Yeah.
So it was just more of a pride
thing.
That's crazy.
But I wanted to run a clean campaign. I didn't bring any of that up. So what that did was it forced the county commissioners in those 4 counties to appoint somebody. And they appointed the Democrat, happened to be his daughter. So she was there for a year. Then I had to make a decision whether I would run again, which is the following year.
Because it's every 2 years.
It's every 2 years. But
so
we had a special election a year later, a special election. I knew I'd have to run 3 years if I won that one in a row, 3 years in a row. I didn't know if I wanted to do it.
And this is while you're still practicing law.
Yes. But we did it. And that year was the only Democrat versus the only Republican for the House of Representatives in the state of Washington. So it drew a lot of attention, a lot of money. But I won.
What year was this?
2009, I believe. So I won by a pretty good margin, and then nobody ran against me in the next couple of terms.
So when you're running, in that, I'm a little bit more familiar with senators because there's just less of them. So when you're running for House of Representative, are you out there running, like, this is obviously an election year. Are you out there running on, like, this is the change that I can make? Or I guess what kind of change were you hoping to be able to make? And I don't necessarily want to talk, maybe we'll get into, blue versus red, but more of just, what were you running?
Yeah,
What were you
I'll be
promising?
happy to answer that. I was a fiscal conservative, and I did not like what the Democratic-controlled Senate and House were doing. They were spending money and taxing our citizens hand over fist back then. And I thought, whoa, I think we're heading for a recession or a downturn, which was what was predicted, and hold back. And they did not. And sure enough, the first year I got over there, we were $5 billion in debt.
This is the state of Washington?
In the state of Washington. And so had to make some tough decisions, had to go back and cut programs and so forth and try to raise taxes.
At the time, how many House of Representatives does the state of Washington have at that time?
98.
98.
There's 49 districts in the state. And so there's 49 senators and you double that, 98 representatives.
So, yeah, let's get into this. So, you do go to the Capitol Hill.
Olympia.
So this is on a state level, so you have nothing on the federal level.
That's right, state level.
Okay. So maybe I'm getting it like, you don't have to go to the Washington, D.C. ever?
No.
You're only
I did a couple times, but no,
So House of Representatives don't really do much on... Am I confusing them with something else?
You must be, but let me explain it. Because
you have
go there to make laws for the state of Washington.
Okay.
And so
you have Congress and you have Senate and you have House of Representatives, correct?
You have Congress in Washington, D.C., which is the Senate and congressmen. State of Washington has 49 districts, like I explained. So there's 49 senators and 98 representatives show up in Olympia in January and either have the long session, which is 3 or 4 or 5 months, or the short session, which is supposed to be 2 months. And you pass the budget for the state, which, controls big budgets anymore. It's all the schools, the teaching, every subject matter you can think of is you affect when you pass laws, obviously. And so you have to pass a budget, and then you have committee meetings at the beginning, and you have to have a broad set of knowledge on every subject matter. You may have people come before your committee on nuclear energy, and the next day it would be education or college education.
Okay, so this is all on a state level. And you're getting paid by the state, so you're a state employee.
Yes.
But it's not like a...
Pretty minimal. I think it was $42,000 a year.
So you're not doing it for the money.
No.
And there's certain amount of time you have to dedicate towards this, because most people have to have a job outside of this.
Most people have a job outside of it.
Yeah, so you are truly acting like a public servant.
Yes.
Is, just for my sake, AOC, she's part of the House of Representatives.
Who is?
Andrea Acosta-Cortez, AOC.
Okay.
Out of New York.
Oh, I don't know her.
Okay.
Yeah, I know who you mean.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's federal. She's a congresswoman.
Okay, so that it is separate. Okay. All right. So Congress has its own House of Representatives.
Federal. What, 10 districts now in the state of Washington.
Okay, so
we have 10 representatives and 2 senators that go to Washington, D.C.
Okay, I'm tracking that. I didn't. So there is a state level Congress.
Not Congress.
State level
House of Representatives and Senate.
But then there's also
a governor.
And then there's a federal level.
Yes.
Okay, so you're working on the state level. So when you are the minority, meaning not Caucasian, but beliefs, how is that? Are you able to influence other people who think differently than you? Because that's going to be tough. When you're like, hey, this is how it should go. Washington has been blue for a very long time.
I was in the minority all 9 years, unfortunately. And so, but you still have a say.
Are you respected by your peers, or are they kind of like, oh, it's that guy again?
you hope you're respected. I think I was, but I learned early on you have to reach across the aisle if you really want to get something done.
Yeah.
You've got to form a group of Democrats that agree with what my position is. And so I was able to do that a few times, which I thought was very helpful. But overall, we would get voted down, or, where we would not prevail.
Mm.
But we are all on committees too. I was on the transportation committee, I was on the education committee, the budget committee, and a ranking, which means number 2 position, head of the minority position on finance committee. And so that means that's taxes.
Are these meetings extremely boring?
No.
They're actually interesting.
Oh,
and
you have
engaging.
a lot. And I was on the energy committee. Boy, it was amazing what would come before us.
Is this all like, can the public go access what those meetings were like, or are they
Yes.
closed doors?
No.
Okay, so if the average citizen can listen in on these meetings,
Oh, they can listen. They can go in and participate. They can testify if they want. And I think it's opened up more and more where they can testify, online. And then some of them are highly publicized. I remember a gun control law when I was on the Judiciary Committee, and Gabby, what was her name? Gilbert from Arizona, who got shot, came to testify about why we needed gun control. I remember there was 7 or 8 TV stations. The whole wall was lined up with TV cameras. I mean, it's highly publicized, her testimony, for example. But a lot of the hearings that you have don't affect a whole lot of people except for certain subject matters, certain people.
Yeah, like,
so they were interested.
like
they would be there.
like property management. I'm sure you had some of those things come through when you
Yes.
were there. And so people like as a property manager, we do follow those cases closer to see how they align. And over the years, they become more and more tenant friendly. And then it's like we ask ourselves, it's like the people making these policies, have they ever owned a rental property, right? Have they ever been in a position where these laws would affect them? And I think that's what people get. They get so disillusioned with their politicians because it's like you're so out of touch with reality that you don't truly understand the consequence of some of these policies that you're making. And
that's why I maintain this. It is very important that you know who your senator and who your 2 representatives are and have a personal relationship with them if you can.
yeah,
Because someday something's going to happen that will affect you personally or affect your business. You better be able to make a phone call, and they will definitely listen to you and respond to you if they know you.
yeah.
If they don't know you, you're just another name or number.
Yeah, I know. There's been some better things I came across where people were like, no, let's make a difference. And I think sometimes people can get disillusioned because on a federal level, it's like, man, I can't make a difference. But on a state level and a local level, you definitely can if you choose to get involved. And
People, I think you talked to me before about this a little bit, but people, why do they run for office?
Yeah.
Most people run for office, they think they can make a positive change. But there are some people who are on the extreme on both sides. Very, very liberal or very, very conservative. And unfortunately, if they have a large enough group, they can cause problems for the majority.
right.
That's what's happening in Congress more than anything else.
Yes.
It's not quite so bad on the state level, but it is there also. So most of the time it gets worked out and you get to a solution. May not be the solution you like, but that's where you
Yeah.
are.
Is it a lot of just both parties have to, where do you draw the line between compromise and violating your own morals?
That's up to every individual,
Yeah.
politician, if that's the term you want to use, the
Yeah.
representative or senator. And that can be tough. You get into that area, no question. I had 2, when I was there, 2 huge issues came up. And one was legalizing marijuana or legalizing drugs. And one was legalizing, I'll call it gay marriage. And they both passed.
Yeah.
And I did not vote for either of them.
So the ones that you strongly had a personal belief on, you would just withhold from voting on because you.
No, you have to vote. You
Oh, you
have
do?
to vote.
Interesting.
There's they have the big board above the speaker's head is got red light, your name, and red lights and green lights, and you have to vote.
What if it was? Do you think if it was anonymous voting, so people didn't know, you would get more more? I don't know if the word's accurate, but just who's ever voting on it would actually vote what they truly believe versus what they think that people wanted.
Great question, but no, everybody is. You've got to be accountable.
Yeah.
You got to be accountable to your own caucus and certainly to your constituents. So you've got to be able to vote yes or no on every vote that comes up, period. So you just have to be strong in your beliefs.
So how long were you a politician?
I was a representative for 9 years.
So towards the end of your career in that, you're still running your law firm.
I retired, I think, in end of 2015. So the last 3 years I did not. I was a full-time representative.
Okay. So does that mean you were able to spend more time doing things in that world?
No, a little bit, but I had such great backup in my law practice that they really took care of most of what I needed to do.
Yeah. Would you, when, I still have another question on being a politician, but just balancing those two, were there some bigger cases that you would become more aware of and try to get involved, or you just trusted the
Well, we talk about it. It doesn't mean that you're shut off from I could talk to them every day if I wanted to back in the law office, which I didn't do very often, but I'd probably talk at least once a week, see how things were going. And they were handling it very well.
So, what are some things you had learned and picked up from being in politics towards the end of your career? You're like, man, if I would have known that sooner, I would have been able to maybe done things a little differently.
I'd have probably been a little more bold about pushing. Didn't have an agenda. I don't think people should have a strong agenda, but some ideas I wish I'd have pushed harder earlier. One was we've just touched on requiring schools to teach financial literacy, we call it, in schools. And I just hesitated. I didn't want to. The schools were having enough trouble with the credits that were being passed. How many credits do we require for graduation? And they were pretty tightly involved with that. And I didn't want to add more burden to it at the time. So I hesitated, and then we didn't get it done. But I noticed that actually my successor was able to get it put through this last year.
Nice. For some of the things, I'm sure, did you author some bills yourself personally?
Certainly, several.
And was that through your personal conviction on something, or because a constituent came up to you and it said, hey, this is a concern?
Both. I certainly was very interested in some because of my experience, my own experience that I had, which I found out my general law practice really helped me more than I ever figured, because I got over there. Number one, there weren't as many lawyers as you would think. That you used to think a lot of in politics, there's a lot of lawyers, not true. And there was so many subject matters that the other lawyers had never heard of that I was involved with just because of a general practice.
23,000 cases.
Yeah. So to answer your question, both. I mean, constituents would bring me problems that were a real problem, like in a nursing home or hospital setting or a port district or who knows what, farm cases. And some that I knew from experience that I thought we needed help on. And then you've got to gather enough people to help you pass it, obviously. So you want as many people to sign on to your bill as possible. Mm. So it helps to have a Democrat. Toward the end, I was confident enough, I'd say, I want this Democrat's name there first, even though I'm really the sponsor. But you got a better chance of getting it passed.
Yeah.
Don't take the credit.
Yeah. Learn how to play the game. How do you, it's interesting, the two careers that you had are general careers now that people look at as, I don't know if the word's disdain, but just not positive. And you seem like a great guy. And it's like, maybe it's more on a federal level, or just when people think of politicians, slimy, there's a lot of negative adjectives one can use. And so,
But I will say, and
you
I
think that's
agree with
earned?
you, but most of them are outstanding people. I'll say that to anybody.
Hmm.
Great, great people with great ideas and great incentives to help their fellow people.
Do you think most people get in with good intentions,
Yes,
but then they, partly because they want to get reelected, they start their behavior changes? Like, I guess with someone that goes in with good intentions, how do you make sure they stay there with good intentions versus, I heard a statistic the other day, and this is more in the federal level, for every 40 hours they work, half of it's almost spent on just trying to get money to get reelected. I don't know how true that is. And so it's like, if you're so busy trying to keep your job, how effectively can you do the job that you're meant to do?
that's hard to answer. I'm sure it's a higher
Is that less
percentage.
of a problem on a state level?
Well, it's the same. You got to run every 2 years,
Yeah.
and same with Congress. And Congress had 6 years for a senator and 4 years here in the state of Washington for a senate, so they don't have to worry quite so much about
Yeah.
it. But that's just part of it. I mean, you're constantly running, I guess, because you're trying to do the right thing for your constituents. That's number one. That's why you're there. And so you're in that way you hope their respect and their vote, and they're telling other people to vote for you. That's just it's all mixed together to a certain degree. Certainly some people are there just to try to run again and stay in office for their prestige or whatever,
Hmm.
which is too bad, but there's certainly some that way. But I maintain most of them are there for the right reason.
Hmm.
And you don't hear much about them, do
Right.
you?
Right.
That's why. They're doing a good job and staying somewhat under all the publicity.
Yeah. And it's like the thing with this podcast, it's, I want to highlight the people that are worth. So there's a guy I listen to, Patrick Bet-David, and he says this often: we're making heroes out of the wrong people. The term we use now is influencers, which is these kids that are 18 to now they're in their 30s now, but a lot of these young kids who are putting themselves out there, and it's like, you haven't lived enough life experience to really put yourself out there like that, to really know what's going on. Where in reality, it's people like you, and I highly doubt you ever would want to be in the term online influencer, but it's like, you are the one that I'm trying to connect with, because you do have a message, you do have a life that is worth at least being inspired by, or someone that you can take life lessons from. And so that's partly why I do this, because I'm not trying to go highlight the influencer. I want to highlight your life, because that is a life worth being inspired by. But your message isn't going to get out there because you're not egomaniac, you're not narcissist, you just, quite frankly, aren't. You're a position in life where it's like, I don't need to do that, right?
That's right.
But I want to talk to guys like you, because I want to highlight stories like you, because it's like, hey, listen to this guy, because he's been around the block, over so many times, and still going, and he's able to articulate. He has so much life experience and knowledge. But unfortunately, your message isn't getting heard, because you're not giving your message anymore. And I would say you're a lot more involved than the average person, because you actually became a politician. But versus this 21-year-old that's like, do this. This is how you do this. And it's like, dude, you don't know anything, right? It's like, when a 20-year-old talks about fitness, it's like, it's not that hard. Just don't be fat and you'll look somewhat decent. Versus,
Yes.
once you get into your 30s and definitely older, it's like, no, it actually requires some effort. And
Yes, you got to work a little harder at it.
yeah. So that's why I do this, because I want to highlight your story, because I want other young kids, like I'm also a member at the Y, so my kids can play and be involved. And I was talking to a 19-year-old kid there, and I was like, so what percentage of your peers drink? He's like, 100%. Well, he's like, well, 99.9. I was like, what about the females? 75%. And I'm not there to judge him, but it's like, why does he do that? Because everyone else does it. And it's like, I actually do want to do a podcast with him just to get his perspective on
Sure.
his life and his view. But it's like, if I can get him to start seeing life outside of that, right? Having something to be inspired by, someone like you to be like, okay, this, if I go down this route, then here's a more likely outcome of my life. And so I'm trying to highlight these people that are older, that have life experience, because they do have something that they can pass down to the next generation. Because as parents, right, I think one of our goals, and I was just talking to my sister about this yesterday, she has one daughter that's 19 and then some that are still living with her. And it's like, okay, what is our goal for them by the time they hit 18? And I'm not here to say, do it this way, this is the only way, but as a parent, we pass down knowledge to our kids so that by the time they are a certain age, they are somewhat productive and they can do things in society. But now I'm asking guys like you to be like, okay, and I think you've already done this, so it's not much for you because you were heavily involved with coaching and all that other stuff. But just saying, hey, can you get outside of yourself and then somehow find a way how you can impact or influence the next generation coming up, just like a parent would with their own child.
Yeah, that's an interesting subject matter, and my wife and I just agreed that we would be intentional parents.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the basic things parents should do is just be flat out interested in their kids and what they do. That's as simple as that.
Yeah, it's not hard.
That's not hard. I mean, follow them, ask them when they come home from school, how was your day or how was your test, and just be involved. Number two, we thought it was real important to expose our kids to everything. Not everything, but at least the environment. We took them on trips. We certainly took them to colleges just to visit. I mean, so obviously...
You had two kids?
Two kids. They were headed to college. You know, that was our intent. That was our expectation. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's overstated these days. Also to spend time with them. You know, whenever you could. Those basic things are so important, and that's what we did. And it's amazing how so many parents don't even do any of those things, or very little of those things. And I think it makes a real difference.
Yeah. So yeah, let's tie into relationships. Being married for over half a century now, I guess, marriage is something I think about a lot. I'm married, but we seem to get it wrong as a society. And so I'm sure you've seen those statistics. Did you ever deal with divorces?
Yes, I did for a while, but it got pretty discouraging to me. So I passed those off to my associate to do those.
So I listen to a lot of different podcasts. So there's one guy that kind of hit the scene, and he's been on several different podcasts where he's a prominent divorce lawyer out of New York City. And his take's been interesting, but so I've been thinking about the statistic more, and it's like, all right, we already know from the beginning, over 50% of marriages end in divorce. So it's right off the bat, right? But if you dig into those numbers more, it's like, of the people that got married, so let's say it's not quite 60%, but let's just round up to 60. So we know 100 people get married, 60 of them already going to end in divorce. So that leaves us with 40. Okay, of those 40, how many of those are happily married? I would say 20%, half of them aren't happily married. So now we're down to 20 couples. And then it's like, all right, how many of them have a great marriage? I'd say maybe 10%. So out of 100, only 10% of people I think have great marriages. That's just my personal opinion. I could be totally wrong off on the numbers. But like, I think about like, how often would you do something knowing you had a 90% fail rate?
I don't know those statistics until you said them. I mean, I know
the 55% is pretty accurate, but then I think about, okay, the other 45 that are married, how many of them actually have...
Having been married for 55 years, it wasn't always happy.
Yeah.
I mean, and we'd have our issues and problems and arguments and so forth, but we'd stick it out. We were too determined, I guess. Or
did you ever get to a point where you're like, I don't know, or it never got to that point?
No, never got to that point.
And you don't have to only share what you're willing to share, but Did your marriage over the years, did it get easier?
Yes.
And did you have, so when I think of my desire is to help people younger than me, because it's like, at least I've been there, right? I don't know how much help I can be to a 50-year-old because I haven't been there, but I feel like I can help people that are younger than myself because I've been there and I've put some time and research into just understanding that better. And so one thing that I would tell a young couple or even a single person is have a framework to operate under when you get to something. Just like in basketball, what's the coach doing? He's instilling principles into them so that when they're out there on the floor, they're not really having to think because it's like, oh, my coach has instilled the principle of passing. So I tell people have a framework to operate under, and then eventually you will customize that to yourself. You know who Tony Robbins is?
Yes.
He's like a life guru.
Right.
He uses the word patterns. Look at patterns. And then when you're young, you haven't been around long enough to observe patterns, so you learn it from someone else. Let me steal all your patterns, and then as I have experience and knowledge, then I can customize that pattern. So I just like the word framework. So what I would tell young couples is, whether it's a podcast or a book or whatever, go learn from someone that's done that or research that. And have you heard of the Gottmans?
No.
So they're a married couple. They're married to each other, but they had a love lab in Seattle where they researched marriages for 30 plus years. What's a good marriage? What's a bad marriage? And so he got to the point where he had like a 90%. He could tell 90% of the time if that couple was going to get divorced or not, based off of scientific research. So it's like, if you want to increase your odds of a good marriage, then I would encourage you to expose yourself to some type of framework that you can adopt into your life.
Makes sense.
So that's where I stand today. I'm not going to tell you exactly what to do. You probably should love your wife. There's probably things you should do, but that's my broad general right now is, if the sooner you can adopt a framework, if you can adopt that together before you're even married or through counseling, and then just have that, I think that's huge. But going back to you, did you have some type of thing, or you just, because you set it out, hey, we're going to stick this out no matter what, it just helped you overcome whatever issues you had?
I think that's basically it. And the one thing that would follow your example of framework is communication is critical. Mm-hmm. And we don't communicate as well as we should. We put things off. I mean, we're human too, but I guess we're so used to each other now after all these years. And I think it helped that we grew up in similar circumstances, pretty conservative, rural areas. And so our values are pretty similar, I think, in similar backgrounds. All that helped, frankly.
Did you have friends that got divorced, I'm assuming?
Yeah, a few, but most of them not.
I asked because I was talking to one lady, and she said all of her friends got divorced. She's 71. I did a podcast with her. And you are like the people that you're around. And so it was interesting. She ended up not getting divorced because her husband passed away. But she probably would have if he ended up passed away. But she's like, all of them got divorced.
That's too bad, but I think you are influenced by your friends all the way through your life. When you're in grade school, high school, college, those people influence you in what they do, whether you think they do or they don't. They do.
As you look back on your life, what are some things that you picked up as you got older? You're like, man, that would have been helpful to have known or understand to apply sooner. I can give you an example if you need one, but I think you get the
You mean, are you talking about marriage now or
just life in general? Life learning or some knowledge that you picked up, you would have been like, I don't like to ask the question if people have regrets, but
it's interesting. That's another subject matter is regrets. We all have regrets, and the older we get, the more we think back, I think about, boy, I should have done that differently. But I would think for myself, I would have changed being more positive and more encouraging of people than I was, perhaps. It's easy to become critical.
Well, in your line of work, it can be when you see that much conflict.
Yeah, I see conflict. And I was prosecuting attorney. I put people in jail,
For what kind of, when you were how long were you that position?
16 years.
So what kind of crimes are people committing at that point?
Well, a lot of theft, burglaries, of course, traffic problems, negligence, so forth. A couple of murders. But in a rural community, you don't have the crime rate like you do over here.
Yeah.
So it was never that huge of a problem.
Yeah.
But we dealt with it. So, but yeah, you could see some bad people.
Were there ever cases that kept you up at night, or were you able to disconnect a lot?
One of my problems in life was worrying too much. Of course, I'd wake up and then I'd think, and then I couldn't go back to sleep, trying to resolve a problem or figure out how to deal with it.
So did you ever get better at that, or it just was?
Well, I'm better at it now that I'm retired.
Right, but when you're in it,
or
that's just part of the job.
It's part of the job. Part of the job. That's one problem with the law is you never know for sure what's going to happen, especially if you're going to trial. If you're basically a case going to trial means that it's too close to call. It could go either way, or it would have been settled a long time ago.
Yeah.
So you don't know how it's going to come out.
And that's what I tell owners. Like when I work with my owners, and I don't deal with the stuff that you had to deal with, but it's like, because owners want more exactness. And it's like, I can't offer that to you, right? I can give you probabilities, but I can't give you exactness, unfortunately. And so you operate a lot in the unknown. It's not even gray, it's just unknown.
That's right.
Unless there's, what's the term? Unless there's precedents for that, then it's like, I don't know. So that's got to be an interesting place to operate under. You think because you're operating under the law, it's black and white, but because the laws are so vague,
some are
that
not.
Sometimes it's like, I don't know.
It's not necessarily that they're vague, but the subject matter or the action is unusual. And how does it fit under a law, or how does the law fit to that? That's the challenge.
Yeah, with property management, we look at some of these laws, especially the new ones, and we're like, well, we don't know how a judge would rule.
That's true.
And so then each company has to figure out what they think the interpretation is with their legal counsel, and then they get all these random policies off of that. So I like to ask this question, and you can answer in a phrase, sentence, paragraph, but since this is called The Game of Life, the podcast, to you, life is ...
Well, it's full of challenges. And there are certainly some negatives, but a whole lot of positives. And most of it is up to your attitude of how you deal with it. And if you develop a positive attitude, it usually works out somehow for the best.
I like that. One thing that struck out to me is that you said was there are some negatives or downsides or challenges. And I think in today's society, we're telling people to run away from that. But you can't ever run away from all your conflict or problems or challenges, because that in and of itself will lead to more. I don't know if you have to go out searching for it. You were in the profession of searching for problems to solve. But if you are only searching for happiness, you won't find it, which is interesting to think through. And it's like, I have a nephew that's 22, very high IQ. And I don't like to, it's not a problem, but his issue is because he's so intelligent, it's hard for him to appreciate just the little things in life. And it's hard for him so he actually dropped out of college, not because he was dumb, but because he was so intelligent that he was simply bored. And one of his issues is when he's faced with so many, even just simple things like, I'd be like, read this book or listen to this podcast. And then all these other questions would come. Well, how do I know it's the right one? How do I know it's the best one? How do I know what that person's saying is correct? Just, he's faced with all these other things. Or like, hey, try this ice cream. Well, how do I know it's the best flavor? It's like, dude, it doesn't matter. Just live in that moment. But I think what's a struggle for him is when you're that intelligent, just raw capability of thinking, if you don't have a problem that you're worthwhile solving, then you get stuck in trying to solve just silly problems that don't really matter. But also it's hard for him to find people that he can relate to. Because when he looks around, he doesn't have an elitist like I'm better than you. It's just as humans, we want to somewhat fit in and conform to people around you. But when you just operate on a different level, it's hard.
Hard to connect.
It's hard to connect. It's like,
It sounds like his basic problem is the lack of ability to make a decision.
yeah, analysis paralysis, whatever they say. And it's just like, so I keep telling him, like, so he's living in a small farm in Pennsylvania, and it's like, you're not going to get much stimulus where you're at. Like he played a video game. He got so good at it, he created the AI to let him play the game, and he became top 3 in the world. I don't know how many people are in that world, but top 3 in the world, which sounds cool. And it's like, well, AI is a huge deal. I don't know how much AI stuff's going on in Podunkville, Pennsylvania. So how about you put yourself in a position where you are going to be like that, right? Like Elon Musk, if he still stayed in South Africa, I don't think anyone would know him, right? So what did he do? He was like, all right, I'm going to go over here. I'm going to start this company, even though I don't really care about it because I knew I need money, then go start this other company. Well, now we all know his name, right? And I'm trying to get him out of his head, but it's tough. And hopefully he figures it out. Hopefully he does, but I don't know. I don't know what to. There's only so much you can say to someone until they figure it out. But thanks for sitting down. Is there a question or something we didn't talk about? You're like, man, that guy should have asked that. Because I've done this a few times now where the guy's like, you should have asked me about what it was like to get fitness and getting older. I'm like, well, you could have said something.
I guess I will add, since we touched on it but didn't finish on it, is health and living a long time in a healthy manner. And I watched the documentary Blue Zones. Have you seen that or heard of it?
I'm familiar. I've spent several years researching this.
And again, it's pretty basic. That it's nothing magical. It's just you eat right, have a decent diet. Socialization is really important, and exercise. The people that do those things live longer and happier and healthier. So I guess that's one thing I've learned.
Yeah. You know, another reason why I like sitting down with guys like you is because life for you is no longer theoretical. It's practical because you went and did the thing, right?
Yes.
So when I listen or talk to guys in their 20s and 30s, it's not all, but a lot of it's theory, a lot of it's future, a lot of it's just do this and maybe you'll get this outcome. But when I talk to guys like you, it's like, I did this was the outcome. And so I just enjoy that perspective on life because it's not theoretical anymore. It's like, no, that was the outcome that I had. And I enjoy talking to people from all age groups, male, female, but more so.
Well, you're good at it, and I encourage you to keep doing it.
All right, so I'm done, but I just have a few bonus questions.
Okay.
What would you consider a high value man to be?
A high value man?
Yes.
To be?
Yes.
Of high moral character, a family man, very strong community supporter, and willing to help donate and contribute his time to making his community and fellow neighbors better. And to stay healthy, because that's less cost to your community.
Yeah. And so I like that definition. And so I try to, when I hear something now, I want to somehow try to immediately apply that. And so because at my age, I have some life experience where I can look back on my life and be like, okay, I can see how I can apply that. But so I have nieces that are late teens, early 20s now, and so I try to help them think through, how do you find a guy like that, right? And the thing with young men is they generally don't have enough experience. Like if you're betting on the horse, if you're a girl, right? I'm interested in or married in this guy because I think I can live a life with him. And so it's like, how do you, so you take your definition, how do you apply it to this kid who hasn't done anything? Because you are betting on, hopefully. So that's where I'm like, how do I simplify it for them, or even for my own daughter, right? And how then do you apply that to someone who doesn't have much life experience? I also have friends that are girls that are in their early 30s. What you can take your definition and be like, all right, now you can look back on at least 10 years, be like, all right, has he done any of those things? If not, he's probably not the right guy. But when someone's early 20s, because your wife didn't know what you would turn out to be. Thankfully, you turned out all right, hopefully. But how do you then apply that definition to these young people that are interested in finding this guy, but he doesn't have it's like when I first was trying to get a job, what's the number one thing they ask for? Work experience.
Right.
Well, I don't have any. And so how do you take what you said and then apply that for a young girl that's like, I'm trying to find this high value guy, but how do I know he's high value? I don't know. I don't know the answer.
I don't know the answer, but that's a great question. And I think it's becoming more and more of a problem in society these days.
Yeah.
And lack of that socialization that is started with the pandemic, and it hasn't really changed enough since.
Yeah. My working theory right now is, okay, if, so I have nieces that are 19, 20, 21, and I would say, if you can look back on their life and see if there was a time where they deliberately developed themselves. Mm-hmm. And a good example of that is sports, right? Or drama. So that's my working theory is, can you look back on their life and see he was a part of something, he did grow, he did do this. So then you're like, okay, I think he can then hopefully continue those skills and things as a man, and hopefully, because we are always changing. So here's my other bonus question to you. The man that you were at 35, how were you different at like 50? And I think about turning 40 and 50. How did you change between like the age 35 and 50? It's slightly different. It's a different topic than what we were just talking about. So maybe we answer that in just a moment. But so that's my working theory right now. It's look back on what he has accomplished, that young man, and does he show aptitude of wanting to learn, wanting to grow? Because if he does not, that's a red flag to me. Because then you're like, because girls always want to change the man. And it's like, change is going to happen, but generally not from the woman. If it does happen from the woman, it's a lot more subtle than it is more overt, right? It's just my wife does change me, but if she comes up to me and says, hey, do this, my instinct is usually not to like, oh, okay, I'll go do it, right? So I think we'll shelf that, but that's like my working theory now is, can you look back on his life to see how he personally changed? Because you're always changing. To go back to the latter question is, so the man that you were at 35, how did you change, or what should I look out for as I get older in life? Into my 40s and 50s.
I'd say, of course, you're going to mature, and along with that, your ideas are become, I guess, more broad, and I think you form or create a more of an acceptable attitude toward people. Mm-hmm. I think that's definitely part of it, so that your edges are a little bit more rounded when you have strong opinions. Mm-hmm. And you learn that when you get into the political world, that you hear more directly from the other side that you hadn't heard before. So you treat it you end up learning to treat it a little bit differently. It doesn't mean you have to change your attitude, but you have a better understanding of where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like when a bill is passed or you're passing a bill, you got to look at the unintended consequences of it on every bill. And are the unintended consequences worse than what the bill's trying to accomplish?
And that's hard. That's hard to
That's
think
hard,
through.
but you can apply it to your life. To answer your question, between 35 and 50, you learn to look through what you're trying to do and see what's on the other end of where you're going to end up.
Mm. Did you have people that you looked up to when you were younger that you were inspired by?
Sure. Yes. Sure. Neighbors, teachers, pastor at church, coaches especially, looked up to. Not all of them,
Right.
but some of them.
Yeah. Another thing Tony Robbins says is, any person or experience that you encounter is either an example or warning. So if you look back on your life and you're having more warnings than examples, then maybe alter the direction of that you're going, right? So not everything you have is going to be an example.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're like, that was a warning, I was like, well, maybe you shouldn't be hanging out with those people or doing those experiences, because you're getting a lot more warnings than you are like examples. So
Yeah.
it's like little things like that where it's like, all right, they sound simple, but they're actually like pretty good, because you're like, okay, I can apply that. And so that's how I haven't had a podcast yet where I was like, man, that was not not very good. But that's how I take encounters and experiences. And I try to teach my kids as well, is with every person experience you encounter, you don't necessarily have to cast judgment on it, but personally you can be like, hey, that's a human being that is interesting or inspirational, or that's a human being where I probably don't want to do things that way, but I'm not going to judge him for, decisions that he's made or actions. So I'm curious on this. So this is a newer concept for me. I'm trying to get away from using the words right or wrong and leaning more towards the words trade-off. For example, I was talking to someone yesterday and she's like, oh, you're probably judging me on this. And it's like, no, I look at things more of, if you do these actions or behaviors, it will lead to this outcome, most likely. I'm not going to say that's right or wrong, which is that was the outcome that you had. So trade-offs. So it's like overeating, right? If I tell someone that's wrong, well, it's my right. I can do that. And it's like, okay, let's take the emotional part out of it and just say, hey, if you do these behaviors, then the most likely outcome is you'll start having diseases and premature death. Is that the life you want? I'm not here to judge you right or wrong. I'm curious what your take on that new framework that I'm adopting.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a downside or pitfall that I haven't foreseen by using that, but I'm trying to get away from more of using that term, but more of just it's trade-offs.
Good idea. I agree. Good way to approach people.
Yeah. I mean, there's few hills you want to die on, right? You should have something that you stand for, which is, no, this is clearly right, clearly wrong, but I'm just trying to get away more from using those terms.
Well, you're going to create a negativity in them, and they're going to have more resistance if you say what you're doing is wrong, per se.
Right.
If you point out a different way of thinking that through and where they're going to end up, I think is valuable.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate this, and I'm sure I'll see you more at the gym. But
Okay.
My kids love basketball, and you still keep up with basketball. I think you told me my kid should look up to John Stockton, so I'll have him do that. But I was curious if there's any current players that you thought are somewhat interesting or intriguing.
I can't think of anybody right off the top of my head, no. With what's going on in college basketball, the transfer portal, the NIL, I'm not sure which player is going to be with which team next year.
Yeah. I've never watched female basketball, and then obviously with this Caitlyn chick,
Right.
it was like we ended up watching. We wouldn't watch the whole game, but we'd watch like the last 5-10 minutes of the game. And what will be interesting to see if it's just a fad and she'll wear off and people will go back to forgetting about that WNBA, or if she will be able to keep that.
I think the league will continue to improve.
You know what Shaq said? How the WNBA can improve?
No.
He said if you lowered the rim a little bit and they could dunk, he would watch. And everyone got upset about it. And it's like, what do my boys enjoy seeing? The dunks. And so they were saying, oh, that's sexist. He's like, just lower the rim a little bit so more girls could dunk. Make it like, at the end of the day, basketball's the NBA, WNBA, it's an entertainment business.
It is.
Right? So make it entertaining. But
well, I don't know. I'm old, and I think that there ought to be a purity of the basketball and the way you play it and the rules from long ago. So when you start messing with it like the NBA, I think it's helped not destroy, but certainly damage the basketball when you are allowed to take 4 or 5 steps with, and then
I know they
lay in. I mean, so it takes away from how you think basketball ought to be played.
That's the danger because a lot of this subconscious, when my kids are watching basketball, whether they know it or not, it's influencing them.
Sure.
So when they go out in the court, they'll travel. And
Right.
It's like, where'd you learn that? Oh, because they call it the Euro step. It's like half the time they're Euro stepping, it's a travel. Or the reason why they are able to fake the guy out because he carried the ball.
Sure.
And so you're like, oh, look at that sick move. It's like, dude, that's just a carry that he turned back into a dribble. And so I don't mind my kids. We don't watch full games. We watch usually portions of the game, because just to sit down for 2.5 hours to watch something, I think is a waste of time. But I don't mind them watching to get some inspiration, because it's like, for me, basketball was always about just movement and exercise. I just wanted my kids to exercise, fall in love with movement. And if basketball is a form that they do that in now, great. It just so happened that they're better than the average player, which was nice. Because then if you're good at something, what do you want them to do? You want to get better at it. But
there's some remarkable athletes out there. Amazing what they can do.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you.
I'll see you around.
All right.